So, according to Anti-Woke YouTube, Hollywood has been blackwashing everything recently, and doggone it, things have to be put right. You know what, though? They're not wrong. Captain America will always be, well, this guy, and not this guy. And Anne Boleyn will always look like this, and not like this. But what Anti-Woke YouTube isn't telling you is that color washing has been going on since well before Hollywood. And it wasn't left-wing woke types doing it way back when either. No siree, Western and European culture has been whitewashing for hundreds of years and nothing was ever said about it. Until now. Here are 10 figures from history, religion, or popular culture and mythology that you never knew were black due to their being whitewashed. Here we go. We begin where we left off in the last video in North Africa, but at a time when it was dominated not by the religion of Islam, but by the Christian Roman Byzantine Empire. Entering in at number 10 is Athanasius of Alexandria. Who was Athanasius? Only one of the most influential figures in church history. Athanasius was an Egyptian church father and what the Coptic Church of Egypt today know as a patriarch, which basically means he was their version of the Pope. Athanasius was responsible for leading the fight against the doctrine of Arius, who taught that Jesus was only like God and not actually God. Athanasius was almost single-handedly responsible for enshrining the doctrine of the Trinity into the church's teaching. But today, if you go looking for images of Saint Athanasius, you get statues and paintings looking like this and this. And look at this one, literally the definition of whitewashed, when the earliest paintings of the guy actually show him looking like this. Oh, stop this Afrocentrist garbage. That consistent brown colouring over his entire body doesn't prove he was black. No. Not even when his enemies and rivals called him, quote, that black dwarf. Yes, that's right. You have someone unflatteringly referred to as the Black Dwarf in a region of the world that was at the time fast becoming dominated by lighter-skinned peoples, and yet we can't conclude that Athanasius was actually black. Gaslight much? Now, if you're watching and your response isn't quite so dismissive, but is along the lines of, well, he still wasn't really black, not black like really black, or black like real black people, well then guess what? Black people aren't actually black either. They're mainly dark brown to brown in tone. And we don't all have flat noses and thick lips either. These people live in northern Nigeria. These people in southern Nigeria. The only true black people in the world are an exceptional people who mainly live in Sudan. Most other people we refer to as black aren't actually black. That would be like saying that Greeks and Italians aren't really white because they're not the color of Jack Frost and don't tend to have Marilyn Monroe type blonde hair. And yet white Western civilization has held up Greek and Roman history as the epitome of European civilization since, well, forever. Now all of a sudden, for a historically black person to be classified as black, they have to look like this guy? Anyway, there you have it. Athanasius, black church father, whitewashed into this. Sad, very sad. Number 9 on the list is a Greek god. Yep, a Greek god. Said to be the adopted father of the Greek god of wine, Dionysus, Silenus was the god of musical creativity, dancing, and hand signs. Could the Greeks have made it any more obvious? Well, yes, and they did. The earliest versions of Silenus have him looking like this, having light brown skin and kinky grey hair, thick lips, and a broad flat nose. Is that all I have for evidence? Nope. Silenus' origin story of sorts is that Hermes, as the winged messenger of the gods, took Dionysus as a baby to Silenus on Mount Nysa, said by various ancient sources to be a mythical mountain in Ethiopia. Once there, Silenus, along with a group of forest nymphs and satyrs, raised the little baby Dionysus to become the Greek god of wine. But over time, you can guess what happened to the popular image of Silenus. Conveniently forgetting that he was supposed to have lived in some mythical Ethiopian mountains, artists have since rendered Silenus as this. Are we complaining? Nope, just righting the wrongs and moving swiftly on. As swiftly on as the spaceship Andromeda, Because at number 8, we have sorry, I've just been duly informed I have the wrong Andromeda. No, not that Andromeda, although shout out to Kevin Sorbo and everything that was the 90s and the noughties. Man, those were the days. Anyway, here's another figure from Greek mythology who, when you look her up, you get image after image that show her as a white woman. And yet when the Greeks spoke of her, she was an Ethiopian princess, daughter of King Cepheus and Cassiopeia of Ethiopia. Now, I don't know about you, but I happen to know where Ethiopia is on a map. And people that look like this and this don't come from there. People that look like this, though, do tend to come from Ethiopia, as well as people that look like this and this and this. Yes, many Ethiopian tribes are actually pitch black like their Sudanese neighbors. So wouldn't it have been nice, I'm looking at you Metatron of YouTube, when the 80s film Clash of the Titans portrayed Perseus saving Andromeda from being eaten by the vicious sea monster Cetus, for Hollywood to have stuck to historical accuracy and portrayed Andromeda as, well, a black woman. And no, you really can't be using the excuse that there weren't any famous black actresses in the 80s. For goodness sakes, it wasn't the 40s. Imagine what wonders that would have done for the image of black people in America, the self-belief and self-esteem of a lot of African American women, or just Africans in general. Especially when you consider that the reason Andromeda was in trouble in the first place, according to the myth, was because she was so renowned for her beauty that the goddesses on Olympus grew jealous. Thank goodness for the honesty of artists like 17th century Dutchman Abraham van Diepenbeek, who chose not to be triggered by the story and actually paint a more faithful rendition of Andromeda. But here's a question. If in the 1980s it would have been too much of a trigger to have Andromeda portrayed as a black woman, what was the excuse in 2010 when Hollywood remade the film Clash of the Titans? Oh, I wonder, is there anybody who could play an Ethiopian princess in 2010? And from Greek mythology we go to scripture, specifically Genesis 10 in the Bible, where it says this: "And the sons of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, and Put, and Canaan. And Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord, wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel." Here's a little story to chew on, just to make the point on this entry. From about the 1500s to the early 20th century, the idea was popularly spread that the reason black people were enslaved by white Christian Europeans was because God had cursed black people to be slaves. The theory was that Noah, one of God's favorite people in the Bible, had placed a well-deserved curse on the black races in an incident known as the Curse of Ham, during which Noah curses one of his sons, Ham, and predicts that his descendants will be subjugated by the tribes and nations that descend from his siblings, Shem and Japheth. Well, Ham in the Bible is popularly held to have been the father of the black race, basically everyone that went southwestwards towards Africa, while Shem was the ancestor of the Jewish peoples and the Middle Easterners, and Japheth the ancestor of the whites of Northern and Western Europe. So if you wanted a slave but couldn't justify it because of every other part in the Bible that, basically condemns people the Bible calls men stealers, all you had to do was cite this story. Except that when it came to depicting one of Ham's most badass descendants, a man who the Bible almost guarantees was a black man when it says he was the son of Cush, who was the son of Ham, Christian Europe didn't keep things consistent. They decided to portray Nimrod instead as this. Yep, if you're a Bible geek, you'll know that this is an image of Nimrod, the son of Cush, the son of Ham, who is said to have been such an adventurer and conquering warlord. He's said to have found the Babylonian and Assyrian cities of Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in Shinar, and all of Upper Egypt, known in the Bible as Pathros or Pathruzim. So on the one hand, Ham and Cush are black when it comes to the slavery curse, but when it came to a figure of considerable prowess and daring in the Bible, Nimrod, who happened to be Cush's son, that's Cush as in Black Africa, or otherwise known in the Bible as the region of the Sudan and South, all of a sudden, Nimrod became white. Yeah, all legit, no whitewashing there, nothing to see. But the sad thing is, even though we're in 2023, there have been no popular attempts to reimagine Nimrod. If you're ever watching a biblical documentary or presentation, chances are this image is still what you will see as a representation of what Nimrod is supposed to have looked like. And it doesn't matter whether you're an atheist and believe in the Bible or you think it's all made up. Unless you're a Wiccan or something weird like that, most people don't think Thor or Odin actually existed, but you don't see black people colouring those folks in just to satisfy their fragile egos and create a false narrative meant to dampen the image of another race of people. On to number 6, and we're staying in the Bible, but going back to Ethiopia. Props to this ancient country. You really have to give it to the Ethiopians. They have such a rich history and have been respected throughout ancient history, constantly being mentioned again and again in ancient texts belonging to other cultures and almost always positively. Now I wonder what changed or what could have made it necessary to stop pretending a black people group never existed as a great and widely respected nation. Anyway, in at number 6, we have the Queen of Sheba, who has traditionally been portrayed as a black queen of an Ethiopian or South Arabian empire known in ancient times as Saba or Sheba. The Ethiopians traditionally have her looking like this, and they believe their king Haile Selassie can trace his lineage back to certain nocturnal activities that took place between King Solomon of the Bible and the Queen of Sheba. Some, however, claim this is all nonsense and that the nation of Sheba or Saba is in modern-day Yemen and that Sheba was therefore not a black queen. But think of the fact that Ethiopia has ruled the region today known as Yemen at several times in its history, and that many Yemenis today look like this, and the near indivisible proximity of Yemen to the Horn of Africa, Somalia, and the coast of Kenya. Is it really Afrocentrism to claim that the Queen of Sheba more likely looked like this than this? On to number 5 now, and we're taking a break from Ethiopia and going back up the Nile to Egypt for somebody who was undoubtedly black, and yet somehow there has been a real danger that the original colour of this melanated hero could be expunged from all records as time wore on. Do you know who this guy is? No? Well, it's Saint Maurice, as a lot of people across Europe know him today. What's the deal with him and why was he made a saint? Well, the story goes that Maurice was a commander of a legion of Roman soldiers from Upper Egypt. That would be southern Egypt bleeding into the Sudan. While on a campaign in the service of Emperor Maximilian to put down a rebellion in the French and Germanic regions of Gaul, Maurice and his legion of largely fellow Christian soldiers were commanded to offer sacrifices to Roman gods before going into battle, and Maurice, like a regular G, said no, and his fellow soldiers followed suit. Later on in the campaign, Maurice would not obey his orders from Rome to slaughter Christian civilians who also refused to sacrifice to Roman gods. And eventually, Roman Emperor Maximilian got genuinely ticked off and ordered the entire legion executed. Later, when Christianity came to dominate the Roman Empire, Maurice's lore and legend was so impressive that the Catholic Church made him a saint. Now, if you know what you're looking for, you won't be fooled by the whitewashed images of Saint Maurice the Egyptian looking like Snow White's cousin. Instead, you'll eventually find this, the oldest depiction we have of Saint Maurice. And other images include this, and this, and this. Even his name is a derivative of the word Moor, which is derived from Maori, denoting the black colour of his skin. See our earlier video on the Moors and who they actually were. Link is in the description. And if you still disagree despite all the available evidence, then we don't know what to say to you other than don't forget to like, share and subscribe on your way out. Now on to number 4, and we're going back to Ethiopia again. Seriously, I really think if any country deserves this hat, it would be Ethiopia. At number 4 is a hero from yore who again is from Greek mythology and is almost certainly based on a real life person lost to history. Number 4 is Memnon of Ethiopia. Technically this guy hasn't been whitewashed, but he might as well have been because he's just, well, blacklisted. See what I did there? No? Well, I'm not getting my coat. For this entry, I want you to ask yourself how many movies and TV series we have about Perseus, Hercules, Jason and the Argonauts, Odysseus, Achilles, and it's not a white bias thing alone. There are movies about Sinbad and Aladdin, but I bet you've never heard of the closest fight Achilles ever had before his secret weakness was discovered and he was taken out. Yes, Achilles darn nearly lost his life in a fight which came with Memnon, the famed mythical king of Ethiopia who fought on the side of the Trojans against Achilles and his Grecian armies. Memnon is said to have engaged in a battle that brought Achilles within an inch of his life, even drawing blood from the demigod in a fight of epic proportions. Memnon is the Black King of Ethiopia who was said to be the favourite king of the gods on earth and a great conqueror. This guy was so epic, giant statues were made of him in Egypt. But those statues today sadly are almost completely in ruins. In case you're wondering who won the fight between Memnon and Achilles, it was of course Achilles, but believe me, plenty mourned this great king of Ethiopia, including the gods themselves. Now ask yourself again why, with all the venturing Hollywood has done into the myths of the ancient world, hasn't it found time to put Memnon on the big screen? Instead, we get The Rock pretending to be Hercules for 2 hours. Worst wig and beard in the history of makeup artistry ever. At 3 is Abu Bakr ibn Umar. Who was he? Well, he was a Moorish chief and general who was a formidable member of the Almoravid Muslim Empire which dominated Spain and much of North Africa for 100 years from about 1050 to 1147 AD. Ibn Umar founded the city of Marrakesh in 1070 and it became the capital city of the mighty Almoravid Empire, which Abu Bakr went on to rule as its emir or caliph. So you see all this and this and this, well, all parts of the beautiful and ancient city of Marrakesh, and started by this guy represented on ancient maps as a black Moor of North Africa. Since then though, a lot of people for whatever reason have decided they preferred a lighter skinned image of Abu Bakr and have painted him and reimagined him as an Arab or one shade removed from Morbius. But whatever. Anyway, staying with the Moors at number 2, and this was a close call, it's the man who gave us the notion of a 3-course meal, the nearest thing to the modern day toothpaste recorded in history, and the introduction of, wait for it, chess into Europe. For all those things and more, you have a black man by the name of Abu al-Hasan Ali ibn Nafi, or to his friends, Ziryab. Medieval Arabic historian and scholar Ibn Hayyan, who lived in Muslim-occupied Spain during the 1000s, recorded that Abu al-Hasan was aptly known as the Black Bird due to the blackness of his skin and his singing ability. Meanwhile, others referred to him as Ziryab, which is the Persian word for jaybird. According to Robert W. Labeling Jr., he was a freed slave from modern-day Iraq who worked his way into the court of Caliph Abd ar-Rahman, the Emir of Cordoba, Spain. Ziryab apparently introduced a snack today popular in Zaragoza in Spain known as the goulash, which is made of honey and walnuts and looks like a really decadent flapjack. But this guy was the ultimate bro, because having introduced this diabetes trap to the king's court, he wouldn't let the king's teeth go out like that. Nope, he had him covered, because Ziryab was responsible for introducing to Europe the closest thing to the modern toothpaste. The solution he prepared was said to be pleasant to taste, and Ziryab used it as an exfoliator for washing teeth, which as far as toothpaste goes was an improvement on what people had been using for thousands of years. Because if you're thinking that toothpaste is pretty basic in terms of human progress, then you probably ought to know that the Roman Empire, which had not long fallen by Ziryab's time, had, despite all its grandness and civilization, been using crushed bones and oyster shells for toothpaste, while the ancient Egyptians were using powdered ashes of ox hooves, myrrh, and crushed burnt up eggshells. Ziryab is also the reason why we eat 3-course meals, a practice which he is said to have introduced to the court of the Emir of Cordoba during his time in Spain. On his advice, the Caliph would have soups served first, then fish dishes and meats, and lastly sweets and fruits, along with pistachios and other nuts. As for his musical talent, he apparently introduced the lute to Europe and is said to have created the framework for the Nuba musical form, which is a musical tradition popular in North Africa and the Middle East today. Finally, get this. See this right here? Yes, this right here. The chessboard. The great European game of chess that denotes culture and finery and genius. Ziryab introduced it to Western Europe. The academic and author Robert W. Labeling Jr. writes that it was Indian philosophers and scientists who Ziryab introduced to the king's court in Spain who first taught chess in Western Europe. The rest is history. Just not exactly accurate history. Because when you go looking for this guy, Ziryab, on the internet, you get images like this. Meanwhile, his contemporaries called him a frigging blackbird, due to how black he was. Have you ever seen a blackbird? Not much room for ambiguity there. Now I could carry on listing all the great things Ziryab is reputed to have done in his life, but you can look into that yourself. I've put the link in the descriptions. Happy researching. Suffice to say what 17th century Arab historian Al-Makari said about him. There never was, either before or after him, a man of his profession who was more generally beloved and admired. If you're wondering why Ziryab is not number one on our list, here's why. Because number one most whitewashed black historical figure is this woman right here. Who is she? None other than Queen Charlotte or Princess Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz. Now there's quite a story behind this entry. A few years ago when Golda Roussevel portrayed Queen Charlotte in the Netflix series Bridgerton, there was bedlam on the internet. You had people saying it was a travesty and an example of blackwashing and rewriting history that this black or mixed race actress is playing a British monarch from the 18th century. But here are the facts. Thanks to the work of Mario de Valdes y Cocom, we know that Queen Charlotte might actually have descended from a line of Portuguese nobility notorious for having black Moorish mistresses. Add to this the fact that her own private doctor described Queen Charlotte in his journals as having a, quote, real mulatto face. And then there were paintings like this, painted by her abolitionist painter Sir Alan Ramsay, who was keen not to hide what other royal painters of the time were obviously embarrassed about. When you put all of this together, it's not really a conspiracy theory to suppose that in 18th century England, with all the plantations the crown owned in Jamaica and the Caribbean, there would be a real vested interest to hush up the fact that the Queen had black ancestry. The pictures of her looking decidedly more white actually do more to prove this point than not, as it was a known convention for painters of royalty and nobility to downplay culturally undesirable or unaesthetic features a person might have. It makes you wonder how big this guy really was. What's more, it's almost a certainty that Queen Charlotte's heritage was being whitewashed in real time during her life because contemporary accounts of those around her in her day were very unflattering, with many at court remarking about her flat nose and thickish lips and calling her features ugly. Charles Dickens in his book A Tale of Two Cities went by these accounts and called her, quote, plain. In any event, it is more than likely that the court of King George, during what was the peak of the Atlantic slave trade, would not have wanted this image of Queen Charlotte doing the rounds, as opposed to the whitewashed versions in which her features are airbrushed out. Britain might be a much more open and diverse place in 2023, but it is quite often reticent to admit the starkness of its colonial and enslaving past, being more comfortable to point the finger more unambiguously across the pond at America, where their slaving ways went out of sight and out of mind, conveniently offshore to places like the Caribbean islands. But imagine that, well before Meghan Markle, well before, I don't know, there's never been any other black monarch as there. But what before Meghan Markle, there was Queen Charlotte. Now you're telling me that if there was only pictures or paintings of Meghan to go on, about 200, 300 years from now, it would be obvious that she was black or she had a mix of black in her? I don't think so. I really don't think so. Whereas with Queen Charlotte, it's even more obvious from the paintings we have of her done by this guy, Alan Ramsey. Hats off to you, sir. Thank you so much. Anyway, that completes our top 10 list of historical and cultural figures whitewashed from history and culture. If you've enjoyed this, please give the video a like as it helps YouTube to suggest it to more people. And don't forget to subscribe too, because we've got more amazing lists like this to come. This video has been Trill Black, no doubt about that. And as ever, we're repping black right.